All right, so I'm gonna be doing some UFC discussion. We're gonna discuss a couple of the fights we saw last night, and then we'll talk about the card coming up, UFC 276. So we'll kind of hit that a little bit today, and I'm gonna be bringing on Derek Galanis and Tim Lewis from Scraptitude. Right, Derek, is that you?
I'm here.
Okay. Tim,
Hey, what's up, Todd?
how's it going?
Good. You hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you good.
Great. Yeah.
Derek, your camera's not on though.
I don't know what I did. Hold on.
All right.
Oh, wow. Oh, it's turned around. That's the problem,
Yeah,
Todd. Hang on.
might want to flip it around the other way. Okay,
There we
so
are.
I think we should talk about the two fights, like the two main ones we saw last night with Shavkat and let's go with Shavkat and Magny
Oh,
first.
absolutely.
Who
My
wants
So,
to go
guys,
goodness.
first?
hold on. I want to say something. So, I intended to watch those to join in, and I
Uh-huh.
was all excited about the Kazakh fighter, and I fell asleep with my phone in my hand. So, guys, you talk about that. I didn't see him.
All right, Tim,
Oh,
let's go ahead. What did you think?
well, Shavkat Rakhmanov did not disappoint. My goodness, this guy, you, it says something about somebody when their favorite animal is also their favorite animal to eat. And that is the case with Shavkat Rakhmonov. His favorite animal is a horse, and he also loves eating horses. And in MMA, there is some lore surrounding eating horse meat, not
Hmm.
pointing any fingers anywhere. But Shavkat Rakhmonov, my goodness, when he stepped in there, we didn't know what kind of fight we were going to get. If it was going to be a grappling affair, if we were going to see the veteran craft of Neil Magny shine through. But Rakhmonov, he decided that he was going to take this fight to the grappling realm, and once it got there, it was one-way traffic.
Yeah, I actually thought the fight would be at least that Magny would have some resistance, but it was totally one-sided. I was a little surprised by that.
Especially like you look at their physiques, it doesn't seem apparent that Rakhmonov would have this strength advantage. But these guys, these like Eastern European, like Kazakh, Russian, like these guys, their grappling, their leverage, it's at a whole different level. So like even though they might not look like the most muscle bound, they're able to apply that strength in a really formidable way. One thing I did want to mention though was the ground striking of Rakhmonov. That's like it's like an art inside the art within mixed martial arts, being leveraging your ground and pound. And the way he punches, like he punches directly through his opponent, and multiple times he hit the canvas, and you heard the thud reverberating around the apex. So he's a really, really dangerous guy. And as we saw in the second round, it just takes a moment's weakness, and he seizes the finish.
Do you think they might match him up with Hamzat to kind of eliminate one of those two guys or no?
I think that Hamzat, you know, like he's got a lot of promotional energy behind him. I think that that is kind of a star-crossed type of fight, but I think it's going to happen at the championship level, if you ask me. Um, of course, there's a lot of allure between the two, but they're both actually very different fighters from one another.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a toss-up. I think now, seeing how they both perform respectively. You've got Shavkat, who's got all finishes, but then you've got Kamzat, who has that upper echelon win against Gilbert Burns. But they're kind of neck and neck in how they're ascending through this division.
Now, what did you think of Tsarukyan and Gamrot? I thought Gamrot won just because, both of them were kind of nullifying each other in the wrestling. But then Gamrot started to make his work. He kind of switched to the double. He couldn't make his single work, which I didn't think he was going to be able to, actually. But it surprised me that he was able to change his tactics and then make it work. And I think over the course of the fight, especially the last couple of rounds, he seemed like the fresher guy who was able to kind of make his stuff work. And that's why I thought he got the nod.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. This was a man in the prime of his career, seizing all of his experience and utilizing it to excel down the stretch. And we saw rounds one and two. You know, a lot of people thought they were really slanted for Saryukin. I thought he won round two for sure. I thought round two was very close, actually. The commentary, I don't think did the best job in this fight, just reflecting some of the offensive work that Gamrot was doing with his boxing. It seemed like to be the kicks in the stand-up of Saryukin versus the boxing of Gamrot, and I thought it was very even. But down the stretch, we saw the motor of Gamrot, and motor is something that we talk about across sports. It's just how much hustle somebody has. and attempting 21 takedowns over the course of a 5-round fight. Some of that goes beyond your cardio. Some of that's just psychologically being tough and not taking your foot off the gas pedal.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of a high-level wrestling match where it's who wants it more,
Mm-hmm.
who can keep going, who can drive harder, and that's what Gamrot was able to do. I see a lot of people saying they thought Tsarukyan should have won, but I didn't feel that way.
I thought a lot of people had money on Tsarukyan and were disappointed to lose it. Me, on the other side of the coin, I had some money on Gamrot, and I was very happy to cash that ticket. A little bit of Max Holloway, and we'll get into that fight, Alexander Volkanovski 2 vibes, and that one guy looked like they took the first 2 rounds, and then adjustments were made, and the championship craft of the winner ultimately showed through in rounds 3, 4, and 5. I love Gamrot. I thought that he was not getting his due in terms of the MMA fan base, thinking that Tsarukyan was going to run through him, and that's no discredit to Tsarukyan. It's just that if you look at Gamrot and you followed his career, to me, he won that fight against Garam Kutateladze. I thought he won that fight clearly 2-1. The judges didn't see it that way. His only loss of his career is a split decision loss in a 3-round fight. It's a very volatile kind of situation. And to me, Gamrot's still undefeated, and he's arguably the brightest star in this lightweight division. And if we're just talking about talent, if we're just talking about what they can do, nuts and bolts, X's and O's inside the octagon.
Now let's kind of get into 276 so Derek can kind of weigh in.
Well, let me weigh in a little bit anyway. So I got to tell you this, Todd. I was in La Tuna, Texas, in the prison there, and it's sort of the crossover point for Mexico where they do trades. And one of the Mexican meals every week in prison is carne de caballo, and that is horse meat, which I think is very hilarious. We're talking about the Kazakh guy eating horse meat. And by the way, what Scrappitude said also about punching through is a very important thing. You know, in traditional martial arts, there's a lot of focus on focusing power in a point. But the reality is, if you're trying to really generate power, the point has to be beyond where you're punching to. And that's great. A lot of people can't do that. I can tell you, I couldn't do it because my wrists were so bad when I was fighting. So I was protecting my hands like a fighter like Jeff Fennick or what have you. But yeah, if you can punch through the opponent like the Kazakh was doing, it causes serious damage. And that art of punching on the floor, inside hammers, regular hammers, punches, it's totally different angles. And by the way, a lot of guys don't train it. They may bang the bag a little bit with it, but they don't actually train that sparring. And why? Because the guy's head has nowhere to go. So it hurts people very easily. So there's a lot of things in MMA you can't train, but I think as people get better and better at that, we're going to see more and more of that. And I can't wait.
All right, so let's get into the UFC 276. We got 3 fights. I think I'll go with the lowest one, and then we'll go up. So,
Strickland
Pereira, maybe Tim, why don't you start? Because I know you got a lot of statistics and stuff. Maybe you could work some of that in.
Yeah, Strickland Pereira is an interesting fight because you have a very experienced guy in Alex Pereira, but that experience does not come inside the context of mixed martial arts. He's a phenomenal kickboxer. As everybody knows, he has those wins over Israel Adesanya in the kickboxing realm, which we all know how great Israel Adesanya is as a striker. But Sean Strickland's a guy who's cut his teeth now in 2 divisions. He's got we talked about that word motor earlier. He has a constant motor, output, output, output. He's a smart fighter, and you see this kind of dorky guy with his chin in the air. It seems like he should get knocked out every time he's in there. But he's actually one of the most sound defensive strikers in mixed martial arts currently. You look at his significant strike rate, defense rate, it's over 60%. He stays behind that jab. He doesn't take too many risks. And it's going to be interesting to see how Alex Pereira is able to formulate a strategy, because he's going to have those tools in his toolbox to figure out a way around that jab. So what does Sean Strickland do to mix this up, make it a dirtier fight? He's not a big-time takedown threat with just 0.39 takedowns landed per round, but we saw other wrestlers or guys that weren't known for the wrestling use that to some degree against Pereira with varying degrees of success. So to me, it's about how Strickland can make this a mixed martial arts fight as opposed to just a kickboxing match where I expect Pereira to have an advantage.
Derek?
Okay, well, listen, people make a big deal about the victories over Israel, but, one was in China and one was in Brazil. And I got to tell you, the one in China, I don't think Pereira won. I think Israel outslicked him. I thought it was very clear, and it was straight robbery. And we go back to the gambling that my friend brought up here as well. That comes into play, especially in those Asian cultures. That's what they do. But, Pereira didn't win that fight in China. As for the fight in Brazil, obviously he won. He knocked Israel out, right? But at the same time, earlier in the fight, Israel very much hurt him. And let's go on to something. Kickboxing has a totally different movement flow than MMA has. The way you're throwing punches and kicks, and by the way, a different movement flow than boxing also, right? Because different techniques can hurt you. As for what I've seen out of Strickland, Strickland is your typical MMA grinder. He kicks very rarely and low. And why? He does that to conserve energy, because really what he's trying to do is grind out the fight with the hands. And can you keep up with me? Can you keep up with my cardio? Kind of Joey Beltran does an uglier thing like that in BKFC. And so the question is, can Pereira's kickboxing play a role to put Strickland off? Now, listen, the one comparison we have is Uriah Hall, excuse me. Uriah, unfortunately, is hot cold, right? He's an amazing kickboxer, traditional martial artist. Against Strickland, he went cold again, and he tends to do that in his big fights. So what's going to happen? I don't know. I hope the kickboxing of Pereira can give Strickland a test. Probably, I think Strickland's just going to grind him down, but we'll see.
Well, one thing that I do want to mention there, is Pereira is huge. Like he's like a 205 pounder. It looks like at 185 pounds. We have Sean Strickland at 6'1", Pereira at 6'4", and it's not just height though. You see like the raw boned physique of Alex Pereira. He is big for this weight class. He's like Israel Adesanya's frame, but with a little more heft to it. And so, like that is just a factor here. We can see. The reason why his kickboxing, I think, converts so well so far, or it has, is because of the power that he generates from these angles, these short shots with these 4-ounce gloves. You're right, the range, the rhythm, things are a little bit different when it comes to mixed martial arts. But at the same time, it's possible that attributes of his are made more dangerous by the fact that we have these 4-ounce gloves in mixed martial arts.
So what are the stats telling you, Tim? Since I know you have a lot of statistics.
Like if we just watch these guys and I look like athletically, dynamically, like the film says, like look at Alex Pereira. He looks like he has some really special attributes. But the numbers, of course, both in terms of strength of schedule, experience, win rate, and durability, just in terms of not being finished in mixed martial arts, all those percentages favor Sean Strickland. So there's a really compelling dichotomy that we have here between the experience and the charted data that represents Sean Strickland as a good fighter, versus kind of this black box prospect that is Alex Pereira, who's transitioning his amazing skills from kickboxing, but, kind of doing it on the fly in mixed martial arts. So who's going to win? The analytics would favor Sean Strickland.
I'll tell you what, though, Tide, and there is one thing that's interesting. Strickland's last loss was to a Brazilian fighter, and whose name I'm not going to even try to pronounce. And it was by wheel kick, knockout.
Dos Santos.
Thank you. Thank you, Gratitude. I knew you'd come through. The bottom line is, does that play into the effect that Pereira is one heck of a kicker? But I would give to you also, Pereira's most damaging shot is his left hook. So the question is going to be, will that left hook swing across secretly and surprise Strickland or not? Or maybe one of those kicks. We'll see.
Yeah.
Now let's get into the kind of one that's pretty interesting in Volkanovski Holloway. So these guys fought twice, right, already?
Yeah, twice, right. This is the trilogy right here.
So, Tim, maybe talk about the analytics of this fight. And because Tim, Derek, before we go on, Tim obviously has a big database of analytics that he's put together over quite a while. And so maybe talk about that and then who it favored here in the third.
All right, I'll give a little backstory. So no matter what sport, really no matter what facet of life it is, if it generates money, there's some kind of math behind it that can kind of uncover unseen details, whether you're on Wall Street, whether you're using a dating algorithm, whether you're a basketball, football, baseball, all of these sports, all of these things, there are data points that can be correlated with success, and we can uncover patterns that lead to victory. And the trick is always figuring out what data matters and what data is junk. Now, in Scrapitude, we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out the most overarching data patterns, because fighters might only fight 20 times in their career, 30 times in their career, which means that you don't have that big of a data size to work with. So we look at big picture things. We look at like significant strike differential. We look at win rate. We look at loss by finish rate, things that gauge how volatile a fighter is, and also things like measures of strength of schedule, how good your competition has been. Because MMA is a fluid problem-solving environment, and a lot of times we get caught up in little details like what a guy does stylistically, and we forget the big picture of how many guys they've been able to beat and solve problems against. And so for me, a lot of times what it comes down to is who is the most elite problem solver once it gets into the octagon, and not necessarily what are their individual skills. That lends a lot to Alexander Volkanovski, who has solved problems at an incredibly high level. We look at his career win rate. Through 25 career MMA fights, a 96% win rate. He's fought from welterweight now down to featherweight. That one loss came versus a welterweight. So at 145, below 170 pounds, he's undefeated. He's an athletic marvel, but not only is he an athletic marvel, cerebrally, he's at the top of the game. Now, Max Holloway is this guy who's a prodigy. He's been in the UFC since his early 20s, and he's built this marvelous a base of experience against high-level competition. Now, he hasn't won at the same rate as Alexander Volkanovski, but he kind of does things in a different way. And as a younger fighter, he actually has more experience. So is this the time where he just figures things out, like we saw in the first half of that second fight? Or is Alexander Volkanovski just this scientist in there, this clinical type of fighter who's able to dissect and has figured out a more one-dimensional, not to take away from Max Holloway, but he approaches fights more singularly in his approach, whereas Volkanovski has this plethora of tools at his disposal. Can he use that? In my opinion, it's yes. I think that he's going to win this third fight, that the pattern's been established, and that this guy is turning himself into an all-time great.
Yeah, Derek, what do you have for that?
Sure. So, listen, and Scrapitude, please don't take offense to this, but there was a historian said that there was lies, damn lies, and statistics. Now, listen, I agree with statistics in anything we do. They're a valuable part of analysis, but, you know, a lot of times analysis is something that really doesn't go anywhere, especially in fighting, because we're talking about two bodies against one another. I mean, let me give you an example. Max Holloway's statistics may blow away Dustin Poirier's, right? But Dustin Poirier has completely solved the Max Holloway puzzle. For whatever reason, Dustin Poirier is over Max Holloway every single time. Now, let's talk about the other side of that coin. Volkanovski is a fighter that reminds me of Evander Holyfield. No matter who he's fighting, he fights them close. You know, Evander Holyfield finally got a shot against Mike Tyson because he fought Bobby Chiz. And Bobby Chiz is a former light heavyweight champ, cruiserweight champ who went up, but, you know, had no business being at heavyweight and was fighting Holyfield pretty evenly till he quit in the 5th round. And that's when Mike Tyson said, this guy's shot, I can beat him. You know, Volkanovski fights everybody close. I mean, I can't believe how close that fight was with Brian Ortega. I mean, Ortega could have subbed Volkanovski twice, I believe. I think he had him in a triangle and he had him in something else. So I think it's very difficult to use statistics to actually come up with results. But listen, when there's money on the line, we're always going to do that, right? People are making wagers and they want to know everything. As far as how the fight goes, like I've always said, it's a fight. We don't know. We can't get in their training camps or in their heads or how they're training. That 3rd round in the second fight was the big question mark. And if you do the statistics of that, and someone did it online, I'm sure Scrapitude saw it, like the hardest strikes, the medium strikes, and the light strikes, it was almost dead even, and they had Volkanovski winning that. But, you know, if it's a viewer, a judge who doesn't have those, he's got to go off the subjective opinions of what he's watching. So really, at the end, it's a pick'em. You know, I don't know who won that fight or who won that round, and I certainly don't know who's going to win the next one.
Yeah, I think it's a good resource, though, to have some statistics because, Otherwise, you're kind of just going off of instinct or your opinion. And
Yeah, well, I
the stuff
mean,
he's compiled, for example, it's cut through a lot of the opinion, you know, and
well, here's a couple points. First of all, I picked Alexander Volkanovski in the first and second fight based largely on what the numbers were projecting. Um,
Okay.
so like there is sometimes a gap in like understand like a guy can look like a world beater. He can look amazing. But then he takes a step up in competition, and all of a sudden, all these holes start getting poked in what they do. Uh, and a lot of times, analytics can kind of be a counterweight to what we're seeing with our eyeballs because we can be misled by details that we don't know how to account for visually. And I'm not saying that like there's two obvious modes of analysis. You can look at the numbers, you can watch the fights, right? And I think that the two play off one another beautifully, and you get a more comprehensive picture. And at the end of the day, we're just gauging a range of possible outcomes. Like when these two guys step in there, either guy can win the fight. Both guys are trying to win, and either guy could win. Maybe one guy is 60% likely to win, but that guy with a 40% shot could still win on that night. It's just about those 25 or 15 minutes. So we're trying to just gauge the most probable outcomes and things like knowing how often a fighter gets finished compared to their overall fights. We call that loss by finish rate. That shows us a little higher level of volatility for that fighter when they're stepping in the octagon compared to a fighter who almost never gets finished, for example. Now, that may seem like a really rudimentary thing, but when we're gauging probability, that does matter. Or when we see like, okay, one of the greatest strike compilers of all time in Max Holloway, well, he's actually facing his equal in that regard in Alexander Volkanovski. Both guys have outlined their opponents by over 10 significant strikes per round. You get into the nitty-gritty details like that, and you see like, okay, even though Max Holloway is more of a fan favorite, he's more well-known, he's even done more in this featherweight division at a certain point, you see that the numbers align in a way that makes Alexander Volkanovski formidable to him. And to be fair, the numbers are not divided by like a chasm. It is very close between these two guys, like exceptionally close. You're calling it a coin flip. That's really what it is, but it's ever so slightly on the side of Alexander Volkanovski.
The stat that I thought that you had that was interesting was the FDR one.
The fighter dominance rating, yeah.
Tracking, yeah. Talk about that.
Well, fighter dominance rating was essentially assessing how good a fighter is when they're succeeding. So we know that guys lose sometimes, especially guys that are young in their career. You lose. That's part of the game. That's part of the evolution. Check out Charles Oliveira, for example. But if you're just analyzing how they perform when they win, the margins that they win by, you can kind of gauge like, okay, this is how good of a fighter somebody can grow into. Like when they're at their best, when they're executing at their best, especially at a young age, are they doing so dominantly? And that's what fighter dominance rating was meant to illustrate. And that helped me undercover certain guys, especially like Magomed Ankalaev is a chief example right now. That was early in his career, not long after following his loss to Paul Craig, where a lot of people thought, who is this guy? He just got subbed in the last round by a journeyman in this division. But the numbers indicated that take that out of the data, look at what this guy can do in terms of his grappling, in terms of his striking, in terms of his ability to finish fights. Now Magomed Ankalaev is in a title eliminator fight. I thought that he could be there years ago just because of the way I was contorting this data. But maybe if you're just watching the film or basing it off of strictly the results, you didn't get to that point. So that's what I'm saying. You can pick up on like maybe patterns that are less obvious that can be projected forward. But nothing's ever 100%. It's just a frame of reference.
Yeah, I thought that one especially was interesting because that's kind of like a stat that you had that you kind of created that other people weren't necessarily.
Yeah, and I have a couple more in the chamber now, Ty. We're working on these beta equations that are supposed to directly spit out odds of who is likely to win a given fight. So we're trying to advance more and more to create more predictive numbers. But right now, the things that I find to be the most predictive, how much experience you have at your age, how successful are you in that experience, and how strong is the competition that you faced accumulating that success rate. So it's about who you fought, how old you are, because let's be real, there's a prime of your career here that usually happens between 27 and 33 years old. That's when that's the age of almost all champions in UFC history, between 27 and 33 years old. So if you can measure the strength of experience they have in that time and how successful they've been, you can generally gauge who is going to be in the upper echelon of a given division.
What do you think, Derek? I mean, it's kind of your first exposure to Tim, but I've talked to him several times because I thought what he was doing was interesting and kind of unique in this space.
Yeah, well, first of all, the kid's brilliant, and I love that. So it's great talking to him. I would say also, though, that, there's a third factor. It's not just the analytics, and it's not just watching, but the announcers play a huge role often in how fights turn out. And I don't know how you account for that statistically. It's difficult. Guys like Volkanovski.
Bias rate.
we may need that, and how about the bias rate for the organizations who don't hire one, Todd? That one too. No, so guys, that's an inside joke. I was trying to get a job at Combate Global today. It didn't happen. But no, so Volkanovski, for instance, for all intents and purposes, is undefeated. I mean, he lost by knockout to a bigger guy, right? But so in some way, those statistics are going to play in his favor. Now, guys like Max Holloway, he's been around a while, right? He's been bruised up. And one thing about MMA, and Charles Oliveira is the prototype for this, you learn on the job because nobody comes in an expert. Because why? Because there are so many martial arts you need to learn to put together. There's no way. Like Oliveira was a jiu-jitsu expert when he started, right? Now I would give to you his skill in jiu-jitsu allows him to use elbows and knees better than any Muay Thai fighter who was ever in the UFC because he's not scared to be on his back. So I don't know how you're able to throw those into statistics. Because plus, on top of that, Oliveira's got like 8 losses then, right? Which I'm sure plays in negatively somehow into what you're doing. So those things are all games you've got to take into consideration. I imagine Volkanovski rates higher, right? Because he's essentially undefeated in his weight class. What I'd really like to hear Tim tell me is where Sean O'Malley stands. And the reason is because, look, Sean O'Malley had 6 amateur fights. Now, I know in boxing that's nothing. In MMA, that's actually pretty much. That's a lot, right? So now he's got 16 pro fights. And they finally matched him with a guy who's beaten people like, Pete Curran. He's beaten Brian Caraway. He's beaten second-tier guys, Rob Font even. Lost to everybody in the top, like Aldo and stuff like that. So it's a perfect time to give Sean that chance. But is Sean rated higher because of his record than maybe he should be? I don't know. So I'm going to let Tim tell us.
Well, the analytics actually like Pedro Munoz here. I disagree. Personally, I think that a guy, for example, my beta equation that I'm using to generate odds doesn't tell me that Pedro Munoz has lost 4 out of his last 5 fights. But I know that. And I know that he's largely struggled with guys that can outmove him, even though he did some work on Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz was able to kind of dance circles around him. He had a lot of trouble with the speed of Jose Aldo. So there is this, this archetype to how Sean O'Malley fights that does jive well against the way that Pedro Munoz fights. And you could say the same thing. Pedro Munoz is some of the best calf kicks in the sport. We saw Sean O'Malley get his leg beat up by Marlon Vera and ultimately succumb to a TKO loss. So to me, while the numbers do like Pedro Munoz at 35 years old, he's talking about moving down to 125 pounds. You're right. There's not a number for that specifically. I do think that at 27 years old, though, you're looking at Sean O'Malley coming into the prime of his career, and the greater patterns with data analytics say a guy who's undefeated, who's 27 years old, maybe he doesn't have the strongest strength of competition, but there is promise there. He's not without his merits as a fighter. I will say, just to take it back to Charles Oliveira for a second, the numbers love Charles Oliveira because of how much experience he's accumulated at such a young age. That's a huge part of it. It's not always about winning all your fights. That does matter. That is part of the data that we work with. But Charles Oliveira has been in the UFC since he was 22 years old. And the amount of fights that he's had against very strong competition. I mean, you look at this resume, you're going to see so many different names in there. And he's lost a lot of those names, but he gained experience. And at this point, that experience has culminated into a prime fighter who's problem solved against so many different guys. And the numbers really like him. I just want to say, so maybe they don't always represent what you think they represent. And that's part of the game that I'm playing, is figuring out which numbers matter and which ones are just white noise.
Okay.
Now let's talk about the last fight, Cannonier and Adesanya. It's a little bit of I would say a little bit of an unknown. I don't. How many people do you think believe Cannonier can beat Adesanya?
No
I mean,
smart ones.
yeah, but what I'm saying is
Sorry.
on paper, as far as the three fights, I would say this one is the one where I think there's more public opinion that it's for one guy. The other two fights maybe are a little closer in the public opinion category. So, Tim, maybe start with that one.
Uh, let's let Derek go first. I feel like I'm leading a lot with my like analytic stuff. I want to hear
Okay.
how he's breaking down some of this stuff. Play off that a little
Sure.
bit.
Sure. So listen, I mean, that fight to me is a tale of weight cutting, right? And that's what it's about. How much you can go up and how much you can go down. Listen, I'm a big believer that going down can hurt people. And what happens, I mean, the science is that the water gets taken out between the skull and the brain, so you're more susceptible to a knockout. Also, and there's no science that I know of, you can lose your power. I mean, I know for myself, I mean, I spar heavyweights in the gym. I have no problem with them. I start dropping 185 pounds, I'm pretty useless. You know, people can knock me out really easily. Now, that doesn't always hold true for everybody. Conor McGregor is the prototype for that. You know, he got his huge frame down to featherweight, and he knocked out guys like it was going out of style. You know, that was his run. Chad Mendes, he beat Max Holloway, he beat Dustin Poirier, and then finally he beat Jose Aldo, right? So Cannonier has taken all his losses, except I think one, right? He lost to Robert Whittaker at middleweight. He's taken almost all of his losses to light heavyweights and heavyweights, including Jan, who Adesanya lost to. But that's also a stylistic thing. What did Jan do? Jan grabbed Adesanya and he lay and prayed him, right? And he won the bout that way. I'm bigger than you. I can lay on you. You're a kickboxer. There's nothing you can do. Now, I think the most important thing beyond the weight with Cannonier and Adesanya is this. Adesanya is a technician in striking, right? Kickboxing, whatnot. Cannonier is essentially a brute. He will walk through you and throw bombs, and they're bombs like heavyweights. All intents and purposes, our history tells us that the technician is going to knock the brute out. You know, that having been said, Cannonier knocked out Anderson Silva pretty easily. You know, so we'll see. I mean, I can't wait. I think Israel's going to knock him out and make short work of him. But, you know, listen, one punch can change everything, especially with those little gloves.
Yeah,
All right.
I mean, you're right about that. And Cannonier has, you know, he has that power. We've seen it. I mean, we saw what he just did to Derek Brunson. He's got that type of formidable power. I will say that, and this is where like the numbers get interesting. For example, the knockdown rate, which is how many knockdowns you land per 100 significant strikes. Cannonier lands about one knockdown for every 100 significant strikes. Adesanya lands about 1.5 knockdowns per every 100 significant strikes. The other side of that is Cannonier actually endures more knockdowns, receives more knockdowns per 100 significant strikes absorbed than he doles out per 100 significant strikes landed. Adesanya has never been knocked down before. So we're looking at a guy who is a sniper. You're saying a technician, also a sniper, who's highly elusive. So Cannonier's playing a very dangerous game here where it suggests his margin for error is almost nothing. You combine that with the fact that he's 38 years old, a very shredded 38 years old. Don't get me wrong, man, looks fantastic. But the numbers would suggest that at 38 years old, he has a very low likelihood of winning that middleweight title. That's actually the age that Anderson Silva lost his middleweight title, if I'm correct. And of course, Anderson Silva, kind of a tale of two careers in the UFC with his all-time run, establishing himself as maybe the best ever, and then of course what followed the leg break against Chris Weidman. To me, it's a formality. I have Israel Adesanya winning by knockout. I'm ready to lock that one in and put some money on it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that fight of the three fights, like we watched a fight last night that we thought was going to be close. It was. I think of those three fights, that one is the one that people maybe don't expect to be as competitive as the other two. Do you guys think that?
Yeah, well, look at what Robert Whittaker was able to do. Robert Whittaker is also very slick, very technical and unorthodox kind of in his approach. But he was able to give Cannonier the business. And Israel Adesanya, the way that he's able to fight from the outside, I think that Cannonier is going to be too slow. He's going to have a hard time covering the distance, and he's going to get caught in between his shots.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I agree with Tim. That is the likely outcome. But the reason we love the fight game more than anything is those one-punch knockouts, right? So could Cannonier launch a haymaker that Stylebender swerves into doing one of his, games like Anderson did with Weidman? Sure, it's possible. And that's why we tune in, right? It's because that moment may happen. Is it likely? No, but it could. I mean, Cannonier is a wrecking machine. He's a guy who has carried his power with him through the weight cuts. And by the way, that's a rare thing. I think you saw how bad it was for Anthony Johnson. Normally it's guys go up and they regain themselves. Going down rarely helps you, but, there's rare cases. Conor McGregor, Jared Cannonier, where it works. And, honestly, I'm excited about it.
Now, maybe in closing, there's a fight coming up, Ankalaev and Anthony Smith, and for Tim's database, I'd say Ankalaev is one of the best fighters as far as the statistics go. What do you think about that fight, Tim, the Ankalaev-Smith fight?
Well, for me, as an Ankalaev, you could call me a truther, you could call me a supporter, you could call me I can't say it's a bandwagon thing because I've been there pretty early on in his career. But to me, Anthony Smith is the consummate veteran, and despite the fact that he doesn't win his fights, when Anthony Smith does win, he finishes. And that's what you got to love about him, is he goes in there to take scalps. To me, there's going to be a talent gap here. I think that Anthony Smith is going to have a difficult time with the timing, the power, and the versatility. I don't see where he gets to take a breath in this fight if things aren't going his way. I don't see what he has to lean on. We saw what Glover Teixeira did with, of course, I would rate Glover Teixeira as a more formidable grappler, more formidable top control than Ankalaev. But he's still very good in that respect. It's not Anthony Smith's time. He's been a staple in this division for a while now. He's given us some good fights. He helps us separate the wheat from the chaff. But with Ankalaev, we have a bona fide contender. And if I'm Jiri Prochazka, that is not the fighter that I want to see coming down the barrel.
What do you think about that one, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, Smith is the guy. I mean, he came up from middleweight too, right? And I think he kind of revitalized his career. And I think he caught John Jones at the right time, just when the PEDs and USADA was getting big, and took him the distance, if I remember correctly. So, he's been there a while now, and I really think that his time is over. And I agree. I don't think he has much of a chance. And like I said, good word by Tim, gatekeeper, right? He's able, if someone fights Anthony Smith, we know whether he can fight or not. But at the end of the day, can he beat the top guys and the new contenders? I don't think so.
Now, as we're wrapping this up here, Tim, maybe tell people what you're doing with Scraptitude.
Oh, yeah, Scraptitude. Well, we've got two main initiatives. We're operating in the fantasy mixed martial arts sphere. We're actually concluding our first ever public league. It's been a lot of fun, got a lot of positive feedback, and the trademark of that is it's more complex in terms of how it's scored and how you have to interact with your fantasy roster. The other thing that we do is of course our analytics that I've been citing this entire time, and you can look out for Tim Talk 276 to drop on Thursday. That's going to feature a lot of the data that I've given a preview of here. Jeff and I are also recording today. Jeff, the co-founder of Scraptitude, we record a bi-weekly Scraptitude podcast. But yeah, the data analytics and the fantasy MMA, those are our two initiatives, and we're trying to take both of them to the moon.
And Derek, maybe tell people about some of what you're doing.
Sure, guys, if you want to hear my takes on MMA, I put them all on TikTok at Derek Galanis. I also have I wrote a book on MMA, Warrior of the Light. You guys can find that on Amazon. I have another book on my life of crime called Greed and Fear of the Galanis Crime Family. And I have another TikTok on crime and the new face of the mafia at Derek Meyer Galanis. If you guys don't want to get all bogged down in that, you can just see me here at TikTok at Derek Galanis. I put videos from both on here, on Instagram, excuse me.
All right, guys. Well, it was great talking to both of you. I think it was a good first effort. I wanted to put together an interesting panel that had some different, I would say, strengths, as far as Tim's databases is, Derek's kind of experience. And Liam, he does a great job too. So I think if we're ever able to all get, it'll be pretty interesting. But I appreciate you guys taking the time today, and thought it was really good.
Yeah, a lot of fun. The great Todd Atkins show. Thank you for having us on. It's a privilege.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of Tim Lewis. I think I was early on that. And
You were. Hey, anybody that wants to be a fan, you're still ahead of the curve as far as I'm concerned. But I appreciate y'all just indulging me, exchanging ideas, because two OGs like yourselves, that's invaluable for me hearing that kind of perspective. That helps me become more well-rounded. And especially Derek, like you, what you talk about in regards to, some of the wariness, or just with the whole thing with analytics. Like, you're right that like there is a lot of trust to build, and there's a lot to be proven yet. And I appreciate the way that your experience and some of the numbers that I'm bringing mesh to give a full, broad perspective for the folks that tuned in.
No, Tim, and it was a pleasure, man. You're brilliant, and now I know what's nipping at my heels in this game here. The analytics are here, the youth is here, and Todd, listen, man, you got me started in all of this. When we met, when I was fresh out of prison with kind of rudderless, and I appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm glad I was able to help you, and look forward to seeing you bring more stuff in, both of you.
All right, many blessings, y'all.
All right, take care, guys.
Take care.